Hello and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio, and it's our weekly roundup of some of the stories that are making headlines here in northern Michigan with the journalists that have been covering those stories. And joining me at the table this week, Linda Stephan from Interlochen Public Radio. Welcome back, Linda.
Thanks, Bill.
And John Flesher from the Associated Press. John, thanks for coming in.
Pleasure to be here.
We will start with you, sir. Let's go up to the UP. We'll start north, where mining continues to be a rather big issue for the folks in the Upper Peninsula, but broad implications, really, isn't it?
It is indeed. Anyone who's familiar with the history of northern Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, will know that mining, metallic mining, for a long time has been just a part of the economy and sort of the cultural fabric of that region, especially when you get to, say, Marquette and start heading west over into the Keweenaw region, that area. Right. And yet, if you go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was the backbone, along with logging, of the economy up there. And mining did go into a deep decline. At this point, there are just a couple of mines that still operate in the UP, both in Marquette County, and they're iron ore mines. And one of those may close just in the next 2-3 years. But what you're seeing more recently is a resurgence of an industry that was looked like it was headed to be its deathbed. And now there is a nickel and copper mine called the Eagle Mine that is going to be opening for business this fall, if they keep to their timetable. And that is up in the Yellow Dog Plains region near Big Bay. And there are several others that are being looked at. The last copper mine to operate in the state was called the White Pine Mine. It was over in the little village of White Pine near Lake Superior. And it closed in the mid-90s. More than 1,000 people were left there. They were all laid off. The little village that the company had created was all but deserted. And it was just kind of a sad situation. But now there's a company based in Canada that plans to open another mine there. There's another one down near Ironwood, right on Lake Superior. And the same company is doing some prospecting up in the Keweenaw area near Calumet that still calls itself Copper Country up there. So there's a good bit going on. And if you look even farther, there's a mine over in northern Wisconsin and another, at least, in Minnesota, all part of the same sort of range that has always had a large mining presence. And so this, for people who want the jobs, want the economic growth, it is certainly good news. There are concerns and questions in a couple of areas. From an environmental perspective, there's a lot of concerns. Environmental groups, along with the Keweenaw Bay Indian community up north, and a private club called the Huron Mountain Club, which is for hunters and other people who enjoy the outdoors, filed lawsuits because they were very concerned about the Eagle Mine, and those suits have failed, and it's now pretty certain that project will go forward. But any way you look, there are obviously questions about mining. It involves a lot of invasive practices, getting down underground. It requires clearing land in some pretty pristine areas. And so the companies tell us that they have learned from past mistakes, which involved sometimes poisons that would leach out from mining sites, getting into water, or pollution of the air, things like that. They say that they have refined their techniques and are aware of the need to protect the environment. Michigan also has a mining law that was passed back in 2004, and a pretty thick book of regulations to keep these things in shape. So one hopes that will happen, and that they will be able to keep their footprint to a minimum and provide some jobs up there.
Is the attitude it's never been safer before than it is now in terms of what the regulations,
Well, I think that probably most people would acknowledge that. Even those who oppose the projects would say, well, yes, they're better than they were, 50 years ago. But still, there are plenty of dangers and plenty of concerns. And so you really have to watch these things closely. The Department of Environmental Quality says that they're up to the task, and that they will take care of making sure that the companies are abiding by the rules. And so it looks like it's going to go forward, and we'll see what happens. Now, the thing about mining is that it's it's an industry that is very in tune with how the economy is doing. To have minerals, you need demand, and you need economic growth. And there's also a question of competition from other places. At one time, the UP was by far the biggest producer of copper in the country and one of the biggest in the world. But it became easier after a while to get it from out west, and so that's where the industry shifted. And there also is competition from other countries. Right now, what I'm told is that the big factor is China. There's so much explosive growth in China, so much demand for consumer goods that we're accustomed to here, and so that will mean they want a lot of metals. So the industry people I've spoken with say for the time being, you're probably going to see a good bit of mining. Most mines do not go on forever, of course. The typical one may last 6, 8, 10 years, and then it closes. And so you have this boom and bust factor that's always been of some concern in the UP. So they'll have to deal with that. And the economic people I've talked to, the planners, say, yes, we know that mining's important, we welcome the jobs, but we're not going to put all our eggs in one basket as we once did. We need to develop other industries that will be here for the long term.
Seems like the UP is just this wonderful example with mining of that stark contrast between, or that stark tension between the modern need to protect the environment and the need to make a living in a small town.
Yeah. Yes, very much so. It's a situation where the UP and the northern lower peninsula to some extent have always been reliant on nature-based industries, as they're called, resource-based industries where they do live off the land. And we're aware, even here in the Grand Traverse area, of the scars that remain from the logging industry that went through and without a great deal of discretion just sort of mowed down the forests. Now, in the case of timber harvesting, they have a lot more refined techniques. Debates continue, but they're certainly a lot more sensitive to that, and they have better means of harvesting timber than they did back a century ago.
The lawsuit over the Eagle mine, was there a particular reason that one is singled out? Is it a not in my backyard mentality, or with all these other environmental groups, maybe that's
well,
not the
it
case?
the Eagle mine was sort of the test case, if you will. It was the first new mine that was proposed after the new law went into place. And the law was developed by a group of stakeholders, including environmentalists and the industry and others who had an interest in this, the DEQ. And so I think everyone involved sort of saw this Eagle mine, which originally was proposed by the Kennecott Company, it now has new ownership, as a test case. And those who opposed the project believed that the company was not required to abide by the regulations to the extent that they should. There was some wiggle room in there, and so the question was, how is this actually going to be carried out, from paper to reality? And they believed that the company was allowed to do things that they shouldn't have been allowed to do, and that the restrictions were not tough enough. So we'll see. It's going to be very interesting. I toured the Eagle mine just a few weeks ago for an Associated Press story that I wrote, and they were very eager to show off the pond that they have, a retention pond, to collect all the water that is generated on site, so that it will be treated by a plant right there and then discharged at what they say is a level of cleanliness that even exceeds drinking water standards. Now, one of the big concerns, as I mentioned, is that when you have these sulfide mines, if once these sulfide ores are brought to the surface, if they become wet, or when they come in contact with either oxygen or water, they can create sulfuric acid that can leach into the groundwater. And so they've taken great pains to deal with that. The trucks that will haul it off to the mill even before they leave are washed off to try to get any dust or anything else from down below and kept on site and treated. So they certainly are taking steps to try to avoid some of the problems that have been so bad in past years, and a lot of people will be watching.
Sounds like. Well, let's stick with environmental topics. I know, Linda, there's a story out of our Great Lakes neighbor in Illinois about these microbeads, which have been making the news headlines over the past couple of months, and a ban now on microbeads for products in Illinois? Is that?
We've been covering this through the Environment Report and through NPR, but these products that are exfoliating, soaps and that sort of thing, and you might assume that you're just using a salt-based product, perhaps it's just got a little bit of a rough ingredient in it. Turns out a lot of those products are made out of a plastic, and they are too small, the beads are too small to be filtered out of a traditional water filtration system, researchers have found them in pretty large numbers in the Great Lakes, and they're really concerned that they will make their way into the food chain and create a whole lot of toxins for all sorts of creatures in the lakes, but then ultimately humans as well. So Illinois has taken the step to ban them. There's a few-year phase out there. And I know Johnson & Johnson has worked with the state and is supporting it. I think there's probably disagreement within the industry, but I think at this point the research seems clear enough that even the industry is willing to try to phase this out. It's a question of timing.
We're talking everything from hand sanitizers and face creams and all that
Face
stuff. I'm just trying to
toothpaste.
imagine.
Toothpaste.
Yes, toothpaste was a big one too.
It's hard to imagine brushing your teeth with plastic.
Plastic beads.
Apparently we do.
Well, I guess
Maybe it's already in the food chain then, right?
Yeah, exactly. I never, having had those in my toothpaste before, never considered them plastic. It just seemed like it was, I don't know, biodegradable if nothing else, just part of whatever was in there.
What we don't realize. But you've been working on this story, John.
True, and you're right. They did develop these tiny beads some years back, and there are substitutes, and that I suspect is one reason why some of the large companies, you mentioned Johnson & Johnson, L'Oreal, some of the ones everyone recognizes, have sort of come on board. There doesn't seem to be a great deal of resistance from the companies. They acknowledge that there are substitutes they can use. Sea salt apparently is one. There are various even nut shells and other things that you wouldn't expect, biodegradable, that can serve the same type of abrasive purpose. And so the question, it really just boils down to how quickly they are required to make that transition. There are a couple of other states, New York and California, that are looking at bans similar to Illinois. And if those three states were to do it, well, it's sort of like when they require automobiles out in California to install equipment for either safety or emissions. Once you have to serve that market, you pretty much got to do it for everybody. And so if these three states were to make this requirement on the microbeads, one could reasonably assume that they're on their way out, and there will be substitutes for accomplishing what we need to accomplish.
It does seem, Linda, like it's one of those, it's a fight not worth fighting, maybe, for these companies to just say, okay, we'll just, we'll make the change or we'll stop using it. We had generations of products before this without microbeads in them, it's not unheard of.
Well, it is a question of money, I'm sure, but it seems like it can't be a huge loss if there are these substitute products available and they can do it efficiently. The question is how long it will take them to transition, but it doesn't seem like anybody's making that fight, which I think is kind of it's kind of cool to see. Everybody is on board to stop this flow into the water.
Yeah. Right. John, you want to talk about there's a carbon dioxide issue?
Correct, yes.
Let's talk about that while we're on the environmental theme here this morning.
Right. We know that just recently the Obama administration, through the EPA, did issue a long-anticipated rule having to do with coal-fired power plants. Now, these are the biggest source of greenhouse gases in the country, aside from tailpipes from power plants. Greenhouse gases are the gases that get into the atmosphere and trap heat and are responsible for the warming of the planet. And it's a huge issue, a huge debate going on in our country as to what to do about that. So the EPA issued a rule that calls on the country to reduce the carbon emissions from coal-fired power plants by 30% by the year 2030. And what's interesting about the rule is that EPA was sensitive to the fact that different states rely on coal to different extents, and so they didn't have just a one-size-fits-all rule. They instead gave each state a goal and said, we need you to reduce emissions from coal power plants by this percent by this time. Now, some states that rely on coal very heavily were actually given less of a burden to meet than those that don't. And it was interesting to see the reaction from different states as this rule was announced. Some were sort of calm and collected about it, and others were waving pitchforks. Now, in the case of Michigan, it's interesting. I spoke with Dan Wyant, the head of the Department of Environmental Quality, the day that the rule came out. He was very measured in his comments and said, we support the goal. We want to hear more about the details and how we're going to be able to do this. But we'd like to achieve it if we can. And the same sort of reaction came from DTE and consumers, the two big utilities in Michigan. The Michigan will be required to reduce our coal emissions by 31.5% by that time, just slightly above the nationwide average. And both of these utilities tell us that they're well on their way to doing that anyway. They're already retiring some of their older coal-fired plants. They are trying to improve efficiency and encouraging their consumers to do the same in how we use electricity. And then, of course, there's the question of renewable energy. And that is really the thing that needs to improve both in Michigan and around the country. Right now, we get about 49% of our electricity from coal. We get about 26% from nuclear power, about 20% from natural gas. One expects that natural gas will become a bigger part of the mix because it emits less in the way of greenhouse gases. Mm-hmm. But there will certainly be an effort to try to make more use of renewables. Now, we have a law in Michigan right now that requires us to get 10% of our electricity from renewable sources by the end of next year. And they've got some work to do to achieve that, although the companies generally tell us that they think they can accomplish it. You'll recall a couple of years ago, there was a ballot initiative in the state that would have required Michigan to get 25% of our energy from renewable sources by the year 2025, and it went down rather substantially after a very heated ad campaign that was against it. So the question is, what do we do next? How do we go about achieving this? And the officials, both with the state and with the companies who I have talked with, were pretty hesitant to say, you know, here's how we're going to go about it. They're all sort of saying, well, let's wait till this rule gets fleshed out and see exactly what the requirements are, and we have time. There's most companies by 2017, both states are supposed to develop a plan to submit to EPA about here's how we're going to do it. So they're going to have to, within the next 2 or 3 years, come up with a game plan and figure out how to achieve that goal. And presumably they will, and we'll see how they intend to go about it.
Well, Linda, let's shift back over to you. We're talking environmental issues so far for the most part, but I know one local issue that you and I have both covered kind of has an environmental angle to it, and that's the Hoosier Valley gun range. Environmental concerns have been part of the issue for the neighborhoods that have cropped up around this gun range, which has been in existence far longer than a lot of the houses out there. But I know the DNR is looking at some new alternative sites for a different spot for the gun range, right? Yeah,
that was kind of an interesting, last year there was a heated discussion about this, and this is south of Traverse City, Blair Township in Hoosier Valley. And that range, I didn't know this, but it's been around since the 60s. And it's kind of interesting, if you drive back in through there, you don't really realize. I remember going down through there to go to the Peace Ranch for a story one time, this horse ranch that works with kids and folks with disabilities, and driving along, there's just all this debris, and I didn't understand what it was because I'm not a shooter. So finding out that it was actually just this informal gun range that has been around so long on state land, and people are very concerned about noise and safety along that area. I think the range has gotten more popular. So there was a huge attendance in this public meeting last summer that the DNR took comments and questions. And so it's interesting, this summer now they're coming out with some interim rules for use in that space, but they've also said, we're going to move it. So that's what came out of that. And now there's going to be more public hearings, several proposed sites where they're going to be deciding between them and trying to figure it out. We sent a reporter out last summer to talk to folks at the range and also at the meeting, and it was interesting. The folks that were shooting felt really strongly. We're a sportsman culture. in Grand Traverse County, it's important to keep this range, but there was some sentiment that if what they need to do is move it, that's okay. So it'll be interesting now to see as this all unfolds and there are actually sites proposed where that goes.
Well, someone said to me when we were talking about this the other day, you know, the gun range has been around longer than any of these houses. People who built around the gun range should have known what they were getting into. But the fact that they're willing to move and that it seems like it's inevitable one way or another kind of negates the argument.
Right, and well, you know, I suppose people always say that about the airport too. You know, if you're going to complain about planes flying overhead, why did you build in a flight path? But just like an airport gets busier and planes that fly in get larger, I suppose. I think that this range has grown in popularity, so even people who've lived there for a long time may not have been uncomfortable with it in the 90s, but today are finding it just as it gains more popularity and as maybe firearms are getting more intense and louder, and the targets perhaps are louder as well. It's caused more of a problem for the community.
The other thing that a caller brought up to us on our program was, you know, I'll come to this public meeting at the Civic Center, which I think is June 24th, if I'm not mistaken. But he said, I'll come to this public meeting and offer input, but I don't know what the 3 proposed sites are. You know, can we find out that ahead of time, or is this just going to be a pointless waste of our night because we won't be able to comment on your suggestions? And so the gentleman from the DNR was on with us and said, well, I can't really draw you a picture over the telephone, but he said, you know, anyone is welcome to call the DNR. They will give directions and maps and help folks find those locations ahead of time, which obviously makes a lot of sense. People want to know what those options are before we get to that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Maybe we should get a hold of them and put them on our websites.
That's a great idea. All right, John, let's switch back over to you. We wanted to talk about veterans issues, and we know, of course, the VA scandal nationwide has kind of erupted, but there's local angles to that as well, as there are with a lot of these national stories.
Certainly, yes. Within Michigan, there are a number of veterans' health facilities, hospitals, clinics, and so forth. And you know, there's none right in Traverse City, but this is one of those situations that everyone's concerned about. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an American who isn't unhappy and appalled by the delays that veterans who served the country have encountered as they try to get basic health care. And so the VA did this week release results of an audit in which they looked at what the waits are at various facilities around the country. And the good news for Michigan was that none of the facilities in Michigan were making any of those top worst lists, you know, of the facilities that were worse off. The one case out in Honolulu, Hawaii, there was a situation where new enrollees, people trying to get into the system for the first time, for primary care, were having to wait 145 days, incredibly, to get an appointment. And in Michigan, it was not anywhere nearly as bad as that. The hospital in Detroit had an average wait of about 31 days. This is, again, for first-time primary care. There were different numbers for people seeking specialty care or mental health treatment. There's some of the other numbers. At Battle Creek, it was 28 days. It was 23 days in Iron Mountain up in the UP, 22 days at Saginaw. So you're talking 3 to 4 weeks, which isn't great. There may be some situations, though, for you know, in the private sector where you get similar type waits.
I was going to say, it sounds about right to just get in for an annual checkup for me too. But.
Right, indeed, and so people were saying, yes, we at these facilities saying, yeah, we can certainly improve, get better, but we think that given this huge surge in demand, you know, with the wars that this country's been involved with in the past decade or so, not altogether surprising. One thing that, a couple of numbers that did jump out that were of some concern, there were more than 1,500 veterans in Michigan who had waited longer than 3 months to get an appointment, and there were more than 1,600 who had actually signed up or requested an appointment at some time within the past decade and had never gotten in. So obviously some people were definitely falling through the cracks.
Wow.
But there there obviously are efforts now with this being under the spotlight to deal with that. The Congress right now is working on legislation that seems to be likely to pass that will give the veterans an opportunity to see private sector doctors if there are big backups at the veteran centers. That could help. One question still to be answered is this audit did flag more than 100 institutions around the country for further examination, further investigation, and they were a little cryptic on why, but it is apparent that some of these were among those that are being looked at to see if there weren't some data falsified, that type thing, that it could raise more questions. There are 3 of those in Michigan that were among them, one in Ann Arbor, one in Muskegon, one in Lansing. So Senator Levin of Michigan said that he had written a letter to the VA to ask, what's this all about, and is hoping to get some detail. And the facilities themselves say we'll work with the VA and provide them what they need to know. And so more to come on that. We'll see what happens, but surely all concerned hope that the bottlenecks and backlogs can be dealt with.
Right, absolutely. Well, good. Well, Linda, let's end off on a fun note. A Saskatoon berry, totally unrelated topic now. Draw the line in the sand here. The Saskatoon berry, which you and I have also both covered this past week or two.
Well, Peter covered this, but yeah, coming to a farmer's market near you.
This has been, which I didn't know. I mean, at first I just thought it was some hybrid berry nicknamed, and it's the latest thing, like the Honeycrisp apple, that's just relatively new. But this has been around for a long time. It's native, I think, to Canada, if I'm not mistaken.
Extremely cold hardy. So I think there were already some acres planted in 2012, and about half the crop, some of the farmers kept half their crop in a year when there were no berries to be found in northern Michigan. So
we've got a Saskatoon farm and even a U-pick out in Williamsburg. I don't know if that's who Peter talked with as well, but what's...
Have you tasted one?
I haven't. I was going to ask you the same thing. I asked the farmer we spoke with to describe it, and I said it's really indescribable. Some people think it's a blueberry, some people think it's a raspberry, or just all different kinds of flavors that just are kind of indescribable.
Yeah.
Have you tried one?
Nope. Another grower described it to Peter as a lot of people think it tastes like a blueberry because it looks like one, but he thinks it has hints of apple and almond.
Okay.
Sounds like wine.
Yeah, right, exactly. trying to figure all this out. All I can know is I don't know when do they actually harvest, and I'm going to get to the farmer's market and get some and try it. But there are some small. I think there's only like 40 acres so far, and they're mostly hobby farmers. But at least one MSU extension agent who introduced them here really thinks maybe this could be a commercial berry for us and really be able to survive the cold winters. So it's kind of fun to think that they're going to be widespread this summer in the farmers markets.
Yeah, the grower that we talked with said they're working with some of the local grocery stores already. I mean, maybe not in mass quantities, but you'll start seeing them pop up here and there. So we'll have to try them. We should bring them in and snack on them during the show sometime.
Sounds good.
Absolutely.
Nice. Well, guys, thanks for being with us on the briefing room. Linda Stephan from Interlochen Public Radio. Appreciate you coming in.
Thanks again.
And John Fletcher from the Associated Press. Thank you, sir, for being with us.
Pleasure.
And I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time right here on the briefing room.